Alrighty, and hello. So, doing a video. It's going to be basically the start of basically what I'm going to begin calling kind of a TNU Talks. Basically, if anyone's ever seen TED Talks or anything like that, kind of giving information about a particular topic, kind of mindfulness idea. Basically, pretty much you get a bunch of academics in a room, have them throw out random ideas on things, and basically trying to better the world and by providing people useful information. And basically the concept behind this is to provide people information on the New Universes project, its sub-stories, what it exactly is, and basically what all of that means. This thing's been going on for 15 years, 16 years. There's very few people who actually fully understand it. Pretty much myself, a couple of friends from high school, and I think like one or two other people actually understand what is going on. So the goal of this series is to try and explain more of the bigger picture of what's actually going on, what this is, what it all means, the kind of larger concept of what is this. And so this first video is just kind of going to explain what exactly the TNU project itself is, and then going to explain what some of the major subplots of the project are. So, the first thing, what is the New Universes project? Why would I be interested in it? What's the point? Okay, so people often get this mistaken. The New Universes project, as a concept, an idea, is not any one of its individual stories. The actual concept is multiple stories and ideas and concepts being written by multiple authors, multiple people, basically a giant collaborative writing project within the same universe, the same dimension, the same time stream, if you will. And along with that comes in a lot of modern day science ideas, like some quantum mechanics ideas, like the multi-worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, things like that, because the more we're studying, the more we're realizing that everything is not just a straight line like everyone thinks it is. There's relativity, waveform. It's when you actually start studying physics and everything, it gets complicated. But pretty much the whole idea is everything is one massive thing of waves that ever move and ever continue on, and there's an infinite number of possibilities, an infinite number of potential outcomes. And so all the technobabble, all that science-y mumbo-jumbo aside, the whole idea of this is multiple stories, multiple planets, multiple things going on all at once in the same dimension, universe, galaxy, whatever the fuck you want to call it, occurring simultaneously, and they could potentially interact with one another because they're all occurring in the same time stream. That's a complicated concept, but it's not really all that complicated. Basically what it means is that you have one story, and you have another story, and they're occurring in the same timeline, but they occur in settings that are so far away from each other that they might not directly overlap, but they have the potential to connect. And they're being written by two different authors. So that's the main idea. So you have two separate authors that are part of the voting thing for this. They're writing their own story, they're doing their thing, whatever. Like, you know what? I'm doing my own thing. This is kind of boring. I want to get other writers involved. So, a couple more TNU writers become involved, and then the stories interconnect. And then things get interesting, because you have the two stories intertwining, and all the concepts from both stories are basically affecting each other now, because they're on the same stream, they're on the same level, they're both intertwined. So that's one of the main ideas here. And now, to bounce off of that, one of the main stories of TNU, what I call core, what at one point I called sessions, basically the TNU core storyline, the main kind of what everyone directly sees when they refer to TNU as an idea, which actually isn't TNU. It's just the first story I created under the belt of this stuff. It basically started all out, and I'm going to pull that up here. This was the way back in like 2000s. Let me go back and so I started writing this back in 2001, and it started following Captain Gildor Anzon, the commander of the back at that time the Universal Defense Commission, which was basically if anyone follows Star Trek, pretty much, Starfleet, that whole thing. Basically, the Universal Defense Commission was a clandestine unit of Starfleet that broke off due to a bunch of stuff that happened in past canon that really was kind of behind the scenes and no one knew what had happened, and basically became its own government. So they went off, became their own government, doing their own things far away from the Starfleet, the Federation, to basically, not really be involved in all of that. And Gildor was basically one of the first captains that they had to basically kind of enforce the law, police the people, as it were. So this is kind of you're different from your typical. Well, people would when they're watching Star Trek, they'd go, "Oh, this is Star Trek." No. If you actually watch Star Trek, you notice there's a lot of exploration, there's a lot of tactical stuff. They aren't doing so much of policing. The TNU Corps primarily follows policing organizations. Now, policing can take a lot of different approaches. I mean, as you see, the U.S. government sometimes does actions that they would designate policing, which is dropping a couple 100,000 soldiers into a city and saying, "You're going to follow us or you're all going to die." Technically, they would consider that policing. That's not really policing, but from a political standpoint, I guess that's what the term policing means. And so sometimes things like that happen in the TNU world. And it's like, well, you're here to police this place. It's like, well, no, we're not. You're just sending a bunch of soldiers in to cause havoc and, political issues aside, we're just shooting up the joint. But that's all another issue. And so basically the first part of the story follows Gildor and his crew, and then Zoe joins the crew, and it follows her, and eventually Gildor is captain through all this, so she just kind of was a field operative, and it just continues to follow her more and more, and focus more on things that were happening on the planet, whereas when it was following Gildor, it was following more of what was happening on the ship. And then, eventually, when the UDC kind of bunch of stuff starts happening, it's all irrelevant now because it happened so long ago that, honestly, if I even wrote books, it would probably just be a bunch of backstory stuff that no one would care about reading. But basically, Akani comes into the story, and she's the commander of this station called Aftershock Station, and it was basically a really far-out station. She was actually basically a genius that managed to somehow become a captain at the age of 16 or some shit. Long story short, it was actually some kind of government science project. Yeah, gotta love scientists. You'll notice throughout this story, scientists end up causing a lot of crap. But basically, the story following her, she ends up becoming the commander of the newly formed what's called Delta Force, um, which is basically Starfleet Special Operations. Um, Now, you'll notice up here that basically most of the TNU story is written from the perspective of the Watchers. If anyone's ever watched Highlander, the concept is the same. They're an organization that pretty much stays in the shadows, monitors, records, and does not intervene. They are purely there to log what is going on around them. So, the next story, and this is where we actually start to get stuff that's more recent and actually logged. This is within the last 10 years. We start following the crew of the Shadowfire and the Captain Alex Warner. Basically, there's a whole section on the the forums about this, so I'm not going to really explain to you all of Shadowfire because it's all in here anyway, so I don't really have any reason to go into the full, but basically Shadowfire is a ship that Alex Warner commands, and this is actually when the TNU story starts going into role plays, and basically follows Alex Warner around and her crew, and that role play goes on for 2 years. I think it's like 5 years in game, but 2 real life years. And then Hukari Kareen, who's actually the president of the Galactic Federation now, kind of becomes a character in Shadowfire towards the end. And then it starts following Hukari. And then once Hukari manages to basically overthrow the UDC and its parent governments, because they're all corrupt, and creates the Terran Federation, the story moves on to her cousin, Sakura, for a very brief time. And at this point, Sakura was basically a time police agent, and so it just kind of follows some time policing stuff. Kind of goes a little bit more into what the Temporal Security Service, as it's called in the core worlds, basically what that is. People will get references to it in current RPs, and it obviously still exists. And you know, these go into more detail about what I'm talking about, but there is a lot of things that I'm just kind of not. And it's because really where things actually start to get recorded is pretty much from Shadowfire to Misuki and on. So, you know, we get past, then Hukari becomes the president, as I said, and we get to Marseille Academy, and that's really where Misuki and the current arc kind of thing, where things are now, kind of start happening. We go through Misuki's stuff. Mimi becomes the main character. We go through that, and then Mimi and Misuki share the role for a little while. And then eventually we get to kind of where things are now, where the story kind of took a year hiatus, more like 2 years. For a little bit there was a story called Of Life and Death, where it was basically following paramedic teams on the planet, kind of doing something we usually didn't do. Just kind of, you know, following the non-military side, the civilian side, going, hey, well, what the fuck's going on with the people on the planets? That didn't really go anywhere, but whatever. And from then, it kind of came to where we are at this point, which is the lobby. And, you know, I'll just do it this way. I'm sorry if I cough in your ear or if I sound a little, I'm actually getting over a cold. So, the lobby, which is where we are currently, is basically we follow the two main characters of this, which people will yell at me about because they're like, oh, this is a roleplay, blah blah blah. TNU is written from the perspective of main characters, and obviously as people roleplay and they become more active, the roles will switch, but let's look here at this projects list. Notice how protagonist list is a thing. These are here because, you know, it's this whole project exists to stay on a focus. I mean, again, as I explained at the beginning, it's a bunch of stories interconnecting with each other, but the stories themselves need to have focus. So that doesn't mean we're just going to hop around from idea to idea to idea to idea to idea forever. So, you know, there needs to be a focus of specific characters. If other players are less involved, then they're going to be focused on less. And that's just because of the fact that they are less involved. If they become more involved, then obviously that will change. But that's just basically the long and short of why things are written in the perspective they are written in. So, as I explained, it's basically written from the perspective of these two characters. I'm not going to go into too much detail because, again, all of this is actually here. But basically, those two get on a ship. Out of character-wise, the ship joins a role-playing organization. So I also control the command character of the ship because, that's kind of required based on the organization that we're part of. It's part of their internal rules. Even though we kind of operate in our own little ball and do our own thing. It's still kind of how this works. But, so, it all comes down to that they, get on that ship starts doing missions, and basically it follows the same kind of premise Shadowfire did, but from a different perspective, because, on the lobby you've got, a mech that's sentient. You've got an AI who was made to into a human form. The mech was also made sentient. You've got another robot that was made sentient. You've got a bunch of time traveling people. You've got a couple mad scientists. The story's kind of interesting. I mean, it's been a fun year, and this has been going on for a year. I think I'm babbling, but I'll move on to the other stories, because I've been focusing on the core for way too long. So, I'm just going to give you a giant mass of the core. Shadowfire, Sorry Academy, those are all part of the core. Justice is part of the core, that's part of the core, that's part of the core. So, Kairuaku occurs on a separate world called Kairu, and it follows basically the royal family and their people in the military of Hintori, and later the Alliance. Most of the people in the Alliance are assholes, except for main characters, because they're all smug, because Hintori actually has a decent-sized navy, then they get nuked, and so the Alliance thinks they're better than everyone, because, oh, well, hey, we still managed to survive. It's only because they blew up here. But basically, Karuaku is kind of your, it's a high fantasy sci-fi kind of, think post-Victorian slash, basically if I were to compare this to anything, kind of think, some of the early Final Fantasy games where you have some futuristic tech. You got airships, even though the airships on these planets are powered by giant-ass crystals, because the crystals contain magic, and so this is very high fantasy. And basically the Kairoaku follows in the first couple stories it follows a military unit, and then the last one it follows a party that's traveling through the planet. Eventually they meet a couple like civilians who are working for the military, and then they meet up with Aura, who's a super robot from another planet. And this is where the TNU story stuff all interconnects. Aura is from the Mazda Federation, which was at war with the Honda Federation, which are both from Earth, which are both a classified part of the UDC history, that basically they were warring for a while behind the scenes and ended up pretty much wiping out a lot of the world and causing massive chaos, and basically causing an alternate history where Starfleet and all that is, Star Trek-y stuff happens. Still exists, and they just kind of wipe all of this horrible, oh, look, humanity fucked themselves over thousands of times, mass genocide, extreme destruction, technology takes over the world, so on and so forth. They just wipe all that under the rug, because nobody wants to read all that. So, So, all that's actually directly related to Earth history, which is actually all directly related to the history of the TNU Corps. So, Aura is one of the characters that's actually directly connected to the other side of things, even though it only comes up like a handful of times, and it's never really fully explained. There is a correlation between the two. The next story, Itsukai, occurs on a whole different planet that's called Alan Morin. It's completely unrelated to all the rest. Interdimensional wormhole in like the fourth story somehow makes it where people can end up on Earth. And then it ends up closing because Ariyoshi, who are like evil... okay, I'm going to back up. Itsukai are basically like spirit beings who can... I think explaining Itsukai would almost need its own video. But basically these beings, normal people can't see them. They sign contracts to human partners who agree to contract with them. And basically as a result, those spirit beings imbue their human contractors with special powers and so on and so forth. So that's kind of the general cliff notes, because like I said, honestly, the whole separate video could be made on Itsukai. To the Skies is kind of your typical high fantasy thing. It basically follows a group called the Dragon Riders, and they're fighting against an evil empire. The evil empire is basically led by this evil version of the guy looks like Lelouch from Code Geass. This guy's an asshole. Emperor William, I think is his name. He is an absolute, bad. It's an interesting story if you ever get to read it, but it's kind of typical high fantasy thing. The Emperor is a complete ass, though. Just know that. Then Visions of Madness. So this follows basically a modern-day Japan, except the main caveat here is there's magic in the world. So, the world changed significantly because you've got like the Napoleon Wars and all that shit, which obviously there being magic changes the entire fucking fabric of the world. So everything's different. The American Empire owns all of the American continent. Britain doesn't even exist. There's like some European thing. I don't even know how America came to be, because, like, obviously if Britain doesn't exist, how did... But again, since Canada was owned by the French, it's complicated. But yeah, the world dynamics all screwed up. But basically, that really doesn't matter until even later. Honestly, it doesn't even really get much into that, because it mainly just follows a girl and her friend in Japan. But yeah, basically the two of them are partners, and they work for the Japanese government's magic division thing. And they basically, end up trying to save the city from getting screwed over by bunch of plots that happen. The rest of the stories are just kind of like branch-off stories that just sort of happened. Black Shift is actually kind of a troll story where it takes some TNU characters and puts them in modern time and pretty much just exposes them to me trolling them. Conquests is a, as it says here, post-apocalyptic story. Basically, it follows the crew of a British ship after an apocalypse, and the kind of new world government being an evil thing trying to control the population, and basically this ship kind of leading a resistance against them, going, no, you're not going to control the world and enslave everyone because you're taking advantage of... Yeah. So, as you can tell with a lot of the TNU things, there's also a lot of underlying political messages, but Connections just follows kind of, it's just basically a modern day story, kind of experimenting with a relationship between Risa Ward, who is from a separate story that I actually never really did much with. She was also in Marseille Academy for a little bit, and Persephone Branchwood from Conquests. In Days of Manhattan was just kind of an unrelated story that I started writing about some spies in modern-day Earth, and it didn't go anywhere. It was basically, if anyone ever played any of the 1990s Armored Core games, basically the organization that this girl works for in this story is similar to Raven's Nest. It's just basically a mercenary spying organization that's like, hi there, so we provide you support, equipment, and missions. We don't give you anything else. You contact us when you want missions. Other than that, you're a mercenary. Enjoy life. So, as you can see, I mean, this video is going on forever, but this kind of just gives you a general basic concept of... There's a ton of different stories involved in what TNU is. So it's not what people typically think. They're just like, oh, it's just Star Trek. No, this isn't Star Trek. It's a concept. It's an idea, and part of that idea is a bunch of stories that are all interconnected. Obviously, most of our main stories are written by me. There are some branch-off stories that occurred. One written by Brian Hill called Hondas. I don't know if he's still writing that one. There's the UDF story, which is written by Jay Galloway and Steve Parmley. There is a couple stories that were written by Josh Travis. The Dragon Within, and there was another one. And Arisa Nornet. He's actually one of the kind of main supporting characters in one of the parts of TNU. The TNU core stories actually came from his roleplay. Then Mike, obviously, there's the voting members, people who... So the voting members of the council thing here, basically we kind of decide what major changes happen in the universe, but Mike is just a friend of mine who's helped kind of write a lot of the statistic stuff and major plot development points as time has gone on. So he hasn't really written story stuff. He's been more of the other stuff. Just like Lewis, who just came back to us again, kind of pretty much only does tech. He recently just got into the writing for Lavi. But, so, this is a pretty unique project. It's, there's a lot of different stories involved in it. The actual thing itself is just an idea. And as a result of that, I mean, obviously if there's anyone's stories who want to become involved with this, as long as they're willing to, understand that we have a set of guidelines just to make sure that, if it actually does become a role play or something, which some of our things do, some of them don't, which obviously if it's not a role play, it's not bound by those rules, but if it becomes a role play, there are some kind of core, conduct type things that we just... Because basically, we obviously don't want players to be abused. Because if you become part of our storyline and connected with the rest of our stories, even though we're not like a inter-role-playing organization or whatever the hell, it reflects upon our writing staff if you're being an asshole to your players and your fellow writers. So, I mean, if you're just going to write your own stuff, you want to be included in our universe, and occasionally, make hoo-ha with the rest of our stuff, awesome. By all means, reach out, but I think this is probably over 30 minutes now. I tend to babble a lot about TNU because I love this. This concept has been something, like I said, that it's been worked on for over 15 years, and it's just... It's a nice concept. The stories that are part of it, kind of, there are some that are more fleshed out than others, but they all have their own unique good parts about them. But anyway, as this video is getting pretty long, I'm going to end this. Thanks for watching the first video of the TNU Talks series. It's basically an introduction to kind of what is TNU, and with that, hopefully at some point I can make a Cliff Notes version of this video, because I know people are not going to watch the whole 30 minutes of me ranting about insert item here. But anyway, with that, thanks for watching.